How do doctors like my husband Mark and I go from being featured in mainstream magazines and even presenting on network TV to becoming, well, anti-vaxxers? We spent years of our lives studying establishment medicine and mixing with hundreds of other doctors. Everything and everyone in that world pushed us towards accepting the practice of vaccination as a good, if not a great thing. It all changed when we heard a story about a supposed virus in Wuhan in early 2020, followed by New Zealand's first severe lockdown a couple of months later. Our instincts told us that something was amiss, and we went into overdrive, investigating virology, germ theory, and of course vaccines. The rest is history, and one of the interesting problems we added for the medico-pharmaceutical industry is how to explain what goes on in the mind of an anti-vaxxer. Because vaccines injure and kill, the civilization is on wartime footing. We're under attack. Half the effort to censor us is devoted to the vaccine issue. The enemy knows what's at stake. If we take their prime weapon away from them, by walking away from it in huge numbers, they fall. John Rappaport. When my husband Mark and I were writing our book, The Final Pandemic, one of the most interesting aspects of our research was tracing the history of so-called vaccine misinformation, or at least the use of the phrase. In the COVID-19 era, the establishment and their media promoters were certainly busy throwing those words around, but it was actually a relatively new phenomenon. In our subchapter, The Cause of the Rise in Vaccine, quote, misinformation, we wrote, just before the start of the COVID-19 era, the European Commission and the World Health Organization co-hosted an event they called the Global Vaccination Summit. The event took place on the 12th of September 2019 in Brussels, Belgium, with the goal to propel global action against vaccine-preventable diseases and against the spread of vaccine misinformation. It was notable that they mentioned the word misinformation, that became a buzzword from 2020 onwards, and used to label any information that went against government and corporate media narratives. At the September 2019 Global Vaccination Summit, it was stated that Europe and other parts of the globe are witnessing a steady decline in the uptake of key vaccines, in particular childhood vaccines. This situation has also been fueled by spreading of misinformation about the benefits and risks of vaccines. The WHO has declared vaccine hesitancy to be one of the 10 threats to global health in 2019. In typical fashion, no information was provided about the nature of the misinformation, and no evidence was provided about the alleged benefits of childhood vaccines. The document went on to note that, on questions related to vaccination, people trust health professionals, in particular doctors, more than all other sources of information on questions related to vaccination. Once again, a remarkable coincidence that within a year, doctors that questioned the need for the soon-to-be-released COVID-19 vaccines became arguably the most heavily persecuted group in the pandemic theatre, a group that also included both Mark and I. Also published in September 2019 was Gavi's 2018 Annual Progress Report, where the M word also made an appearance on page 21. It is here we read that globally, vaccine hesitancy is a major concern and has been reported in more than 90% of countries. Frontline workers are key to building parental confidence, as conflicting advice can be especially damaging. Hesitant parents are more likely to seek out information on vaccines on the internet and from other sources where misinformation and rumours can spread rapidly. Why is this noteworthy? Well, in Gavi's 5 previous annual progress reports, that is from 2013 to 2017, with each report up to 100 pages in length, the word misinformation did not appear once. If they allege you are a conspiracy theorist at this point, you can respond that you are a conspiracy empiricist, because the evidence is there for all of us to see. By 2020, the establishment publications mentioning misinformation went into overdrive. For For example, the Sabin-Aspen Group published a 173-page document in May 2020 titled Meeting the Challenge of Vaccination Hesitancy. One would have to suspect that such a large document was being prepared prior to the declaration of the COVID-19 pandemic just 2 months earlier. The word misinformation was peppered throughout the document, and it even featured an entire section dedicated to online misinformation about vaccines. The introduction section had nothing to do with health and everything to do with getting more shots into arms, as though vaccine acceptance and the maximal number of injections given had become virtues in themselves. For us, two major themes stood out with respect to our research over this period leading up to 2020. The first was the coordinated introduction of the word misinformation on a wide scale, particularly in regard to vaccines. The second was that the establishment did not predict the massive increase in awareness of the flaws in both the virus model and germ theory. Those running the scam may tolerate some compromises to the narrative here and there, but the highest level refutations involving the very existence of viruses or microbes with pathogenic properties completely devastate their narratives. Hence, the continuation of the show relies on so-called anti-vaxxers like RFK Jr., who makes some good calls at times, but overall keeps the virus and contagion narratives in play. In other words, framing the debate around which vaccines are okay, or how much testing new vaccines require, or at what age children should receive various vaccines. If you have not seen it, you may want to consider pausing at this point to watch my 2023 video, A for Anti-Vaxxer. It provides an outline of some historical aspects of this issue, as well as the overwhelming epidemiological evidence against all vaccines. The presentation also covers why most doctors are clueless about vaccination and how the COVID-19 fraud inadvertently woke up a new generation of vaccine critics. Coming back to this presentation, the growing number of people that are aware of the lack of evidence for viruses and pathogenic microbes poses a major problem for the vaccine peddlers. We have systematically dismantled the upstream scientific considerations, so the concept of vaccination is already dead in the water. In general, the establishment completely avoid getting into these refutations. For example, I was once part of a conversation with a journalist from the BBC who said they wanted to interview someone who did not believe in germ theory. The opportunity to interview me was right there, but the journalist refused and instead tried to put questions to someone less knowledgeable in the material. Before we go further, how does the mainstream currently classify an anti-vaxxer? If we enter the term into a search browser, the AI-generated response returns the following. An anti-vaxxer is a person who opposes the use of vaccines, regulations mandating vaccination, or both, often specifically referring to a parent who opposes having their child vaccinated. Anti-vaxxers are often characterised by their dissemination of misinformation and disinformation, including conspiracy theories about vaccines causing autism, altering DNA, implanting microchips, or leading to sterilisation. The World Health Organization has described the spread of vaccine-related misinformation during the pandemic as an infodemic, emphasising the societal harm caused by such behaviour. Despite the overwhelming scientific consensus supporting the safety and effectiveness of vaccines, anti-vaxxer rhetoric continues to influence public policy and contribute to vaccine hesitancy, posing risks to public health and herd immunity. Once again, we see a disclaimer at the end of the response. Please verify critical facts. Yes, we already have, you naughty bot. One of the recurrent allegations you will see against anti-vaxxers, such as in the AI-generated answer, is the notion that they are a risk to public health. In fact, in 2023, a kangaroo court in New Zealand apparently charged me with public harm and claimed that I owe them $160,000 for COVID crimes. Never mind that not one harmed person could be found in my case or in the cases of other public anti-vaxxers. On the contrary, we get increasing numbers of thankful messages from those who now avoid vaccines for themselves and their children. Which brings us to the overall theme of this presentation being, How do the medico-pharmaceutical industry and their allies explain the mind of the anti-vaxxer? Remember, they claim that vaccines are so unequivocally beneficial that you have to be crazy not to accept them. In that case, wouldn't anti-vaxxers be putting themselves and those under their care at the most risk? Surely we have the most skin in the game, because according to the industry, our very lives and the lives of our children are being gambled with. However, in the Wikipedia entry titled Anti-Vaccine Activism, we don't see any mention of this, and instead encounter words such as collaborating networks, vaccine misinformation, disinformation, fringe doctors, myths, conspiracy theories, and my favourite, distorting the public understanding of science. Then there is an entire section called Strategies and Tactics, which alleges anti-vaxxers use specific disinformation tactics to trick others. It reminds me of when I was a doctor in the system and a colleague said to me, "Sam, watch out for these anti-vaccine groups. They are very sophisticated and funded by huge amounts of money." It made me wonder, even if they are sophisticated, who is providing all the money and for what purpose? What is the end goal for these nefarious anti-vaxxers? The Wikipedia entry doesn't explain, but states that vaccine hesitancy and anti-vaccine activism exist within a broader context that involves cultural tradition, religious belief, approaches to health and disease, and political affiliation. There is a single citation for the sentence, and it is an article titled Vaccine Hesitancy, Acceptance, and Anti-Vaccination. That was published in April 2021. The authors are off to a flying start and repeat the mantra, the World Health Organization identified the reluctance or refusal to vaccinate despite availability of vaccines as one of the 10 threats to global health in 2019. Here we have an appeal to authority, in this case, an appeal to one of the most corrupt authorities on the landscape. Now, this is a review article, and the authors next expose their naivety to the fraud of virology by stating, since the publication in January 2020 of the genetic sequence of SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19, whoopsie, if virological fraud, and specifically that involving SARS-CoV-2, is new to you, then we have dozens of publications covering this, including Mark's treatise, A Farewell to Virology, or for something less technical, our essay Unmasking the Viral Paradigm. The authors of the public health article also fancy themselves as social engineers and hubristically state, most people, even those who are the most critical, do not recognise themselves as anti-vaccine, and given the negative connotations associated with this term, this labelling is unproductive in moving people toward vaccine acceptance. This reminds me of something.
Gotta settle down, there's too much pace here. The dogs had to get in and niggle those sheep. They went through the markers, nearly pushing one over on the left.
They are certainly keen to give the sheeple plenty of nudges, as they enthusiastically explain, the number of vaccines administered today is thankfully much larger than during the 19th century. The article then attempts to synthesise explanations as to why people would not accept vaccines. They list, quote, obsolete medical philosophies. Right, and apparently debates about vaccines were once appropriate, but not in the present era, as the science is settled. The authors slip seamlessly into Orwellian speak and proclaim that vaccination has become one of the main symbols of the progress brought about by science, and in parallel, vaccine criticism has become the symbol of anti-science forces.
Because I represent science.
The article goes on to cite political forces, conspiracy theories, racism, lack of knowledge, and even, quote, extreme forms of libertarianism as factors that motivate those against vaccines. They make the preposterous claim that people who actively criticise vaccines in public are often motivated by profit, e.g. selling alternatives to vaccines or other health products that fit into an alternative lifestyle. Yes, the millions of people that resisted the COVID vaccine tyranny in recent years were all motivated by the lucrative profit margins. Losing your job, being blocked from travel, and banned off social media platforms are all handy ways to boost your revenue. You can also see the problem with their argument here. I'm not sure what an alternative to a vaccine is, but even if such a product existed, wouldn't the person selling it still not be accepting any vaccines themselves? As I mentioned earlier, they would have skin in the game and be risking their own life, according to the industry. In the section Vaccine Criticism and Healthcare Providers, we see the surprising admission that a study of vaccination practices and attitudes among general practitioners in France has shown that up to 43% of the surveyed practitioners were not recommending vaccination to their target patients, and that many were disagreeing with statements about the safety and usefulness of vaccines. However, once again, the authors need to steer their wayward flock back into the paddock and conclude, given providers' critical role in maintaining vaccine acceptance, understanding and addressing the specific concerns of mainstream and complementary healthcare providers along the vaccine hesitancy spectrum are crucial to ensure and sustain the success of vaccination programs.
These sheep don't look quite as happy. One in.
The full-blown stupidity of the article comes to a head in the section dealing with vaccine critics. Here they claim that the 5 key tactics used by vaccine critics are use of conspiracy theories, reference to fake experts, selectivity in evidence used to criticise vaccines, impossible expectations, and misrepresentation or false logic. On the contrary, these are some of the key factors used by the industry to promote vaccines, aided by the corporate media,
brought to you by Pfizer,
and those with vested interests in the pandemic industry. You will note the theme of vaccine peddlers, in which they paint a caricature of anti-vaxxers as misguided deception agents who create chaos in our communities. However, in articles like this, it is the only conclusion they can ever reach, because they start with the premise that vaccines are unquestionably good. Indeed, when we head back to Wikipedia's anti-vaccine activism entry, we read the claim that there is no substantive debate or hesitancy within mainstream medical circles about the benefits of vaccination. The scientific consensus is clear and unambiguous in favour of vaccines. And what is the single citation for this sweeping proclamation? It's the same Public Health Journal article we have just been through. There is no mention of the fact that doctors are typically ejected from, quote, mainstream medical circles when they question vaccines, whether it's Dr. Andrew Wakefield, Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, Dr. Paul Thomas, Dr. Andrew Kaufman, or Mark and I, to name a few. The only response we get from our formal medical circles is shunning, being suspended or struck off. There are no invitations to discuss our research findings, and little indication that they are even aware of any of the details of the arguments. Furthermore, coming back to alleged motives, there is absolutely no explanation as to why highly paid doctors take huge pay cuts to become anti-vaxxers. The icing on the cake on Wikipedia's page is the section Countering Anti-Vaccine Activism. It is full of patronising management speak, and we read that, quote, the cultivation of critical thinking, health and science awareness, and media literacy skills are all recommended to help people more critically assess the credibility of the information they see. Yes, that's just the environment that governments create when they hand over billions of our dollars to the pharmaceutical industry, propagandise the population with daily messaging, and brutally suppress anyone who dares to question these activities. The vaccine salespeople need to face the facts. If their products were so amazing, they would sell themselves. People would be scrambling to get every jab and would be happy to pay a premium for the privilege. The reality is they're trying to sell a lemon, and very few people are prepared to pay out of pocket for these products. As we outlined in our book, The Final Pandemic, Big Pharma were being warned by PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2007 that their business model and revenue streams were in potential decline. The pharmaceutical industry was advised to look at all manner of vaccinations to secure future income and, quote, boost demand for vaccines through government, in other words, taxpayer funding. This global production involves the creation of boondoggles through narratives that lure the public into fighting the windmills. To date, the COVID show was the pinnacle of the scam, in which the average person was left struggling and perplexed after the biggest transfer of wealth in our lifetimes. Thankfully, it has also made far more people aware of the deception. If you want to help others understand the fraud of vaccines, then a good place to start is the book Dissolving Illusions by Humphreys and Bystrianic. Their extensive charts are also freely available online, and I'll provide the link in the description. Equally helpful are Jordan Henderson's Gallery of Graphs. These publications use the establishment's own official epidemiological data to conclusively demonstrate that the mainstream's vaccine narratives are false. Additionally, Jordan's 7-part series, Vaccine Evangelists, Apostates and Apologists, provides everything you need to know about vaccine propaganda and the various ways it has been reinvented. The scientific reasons for why these narratives are false can be discovered upstream from this data. It involves a thorough analysis of the foundational evidence for viruses, pathogenic microbes, and the concept of disease contagion. We have extensive resources on all of these topics, and they can be accessed for free at drsambailey.com. If you enjoyed this video, please visit supportdrsam.com.